This is a Media Lab podcast. Welcome to Putting It Together, the podcast that goes through the entire body of work of Stephen Sondheim, show by show and song by song. My name is Kyle Marshall, your self-described Sondheim expert. Hopefully your new year is going well. I have to tell you, my New Year's was pretty low-key, and in a different context might sound very, very sad. I drank an entire bottle of champagne all by myself and watched movies. So perfect, right? A perfect way to enter into the year 2022. I just wanted to take a moment here right at the very beginning to do some listener feedback. This comes on Twitter. I was sent a message by Darth Egregious at M. Stone Hennessy. But Darth Egregious says the line, "His eye was odd," to me always referred to his gaze being strange and unsettling, not that he had one lazy eye or something. The singular is often used when referring to looking/seeing, as in keep an eye on things while I'm gone. And I have to say, that probably actually is more likely. They're not talking literally about Sweeney Todd's eye in those ballads. They're saying, again, his gaze, his look, his visage was actually odd, not that his literal eye was odd. So thank you so much for calling me out on that. I think that is actually probably true. This week, of course, we are getting into, I'm calling like the first real song. Not that the ballads aren't real songs, but you know what I mean. We're getting into the actual plot of the show, not just like that Greek chorus standing at the front telling us what we're about to watch. Adrianna Boris is coming back to talk about No Place Like London. There is a moment... This is very far into the episode where I bring up something about Tom Hanks giving a presentation at Microsoft. I was wrong. It's not Microsoft. It's Sony. It took me a while to actually find this viral video from like a decade ago. So I misspoke. It's not Microsoft. It's actually a Sony event. Enjoy that little clip that you'll hear partway through our show today. But might as well get into it right now. There is no place like London, so let's get to it.
I have sailed the world, beheld its wonders, from the Dardanelles to the mountains of Peru, but there's no place like London. No, there's no place like London. Mr. Todd?
Adrianna, thank you so much for coming back to the show.
Thanks for having me.
You've been here before, so we know your history with Stephen Sondheim. But what we haven't discussed really is your history with Sweeney Todd. So what's your history with the barber?
So I think like most people of my generation, and I just turned 30 a few months ago, I think for most of us, it was the movie, the Tim Burton movie, which I think probably most people generally, especially people my age, we liked it when we saw it the first time, if we were already Tim Burton fans. And then the more familiar we got with the content, the more we realized that that form was not dictated by that content. And I've become sort of disenchanted with it over time. But where it really kind of grabbed me was when I was doing a production of Oliver, which is I know it's a classic, but I find it dreadfully boring to be in or to listen to or to watch. And I know that that's controversial. Lots of people love it. Please don't at me.
No, there's someone who I greatly admire who, I don't know why, this is like me, one of my COVID things was trying to catch up on shows I'm actually weirdly not familiar with, Oliver being one of them. And I agree with their take in that I think Oliver is actually a bad stage show. Yeah. But the movie is actually pretty decent. Like, it's not great either, but it's a decent adaptation of that because they change a bunch of stuff that should be changed anyways. So. Yeah.
Well, and like in the production I did, the music director illegally, I'm sure, cut buckets of like orchestration. Like it wasn't even songs that people sung. It was just minutes and minutes and minutes and minutes of the orchestra, big, huge, lush, full orchestra playing, a fine score. But I think it was just written for a very different audience.
Yeah. Were you an actor in it, or were you doing something else with it?
Yeah, I was in the in the ensemble, I was the any milk today, mistress. That was me. But and that actually, I found out after the fact that part earned me a crude nickname from some people involved in the production.
Wow.
Like milk related nickname. Yeah. But it being Dickensian, Sweeney Todd was part of the discussion amongst some of the cast, and I was like 18 at the time, and so like I've seen the movie a few times, and but I went back and listened to it, and I watched the recording with Angela Lansbury, and it was George Hearn was in, and it just, I was like, oh my God, this is so much better than this really awkward Tim Burton movie.
It is a great example, and everyone now probably knows as they're listening to this season that I've recorded all these episodes out of order. So I've probably either said this or I'm about to say it in a future episode. But
the mystery is shattered, Kyle. Shattered, I tell you.
And I just never remember like what episode I said what things in. So it's like, whatever. Either it was in the past or it's coming up or something. This is the greatest, or one of the greatest examples of like the perfect actor being put into a role, and it's Angela Lansbury as Mrs. Lovett, because no one has ever come close to like just nailing this role as much as she does. Because as soon as she shows up in that recorded version, it's like, okay, this is Angela's show for the next 2 hours.
I really haven't seen, and I've one of those people, and I'm sure you can identify with this, who like just spend a lot of time watching Sondheim related videos on YouTube. Is like one of my favorite pastimes. There really has never been anyone like her in that part. And other Lovetts have done fine and like great in their in their own ways, and they all have their own merits. Like Patty wailing on a tuba, sure, that's great. But it's Angela Lansbury had something really special with that part that, you're right, I don't think has really been captured, and that's not your job as an actor to try to recapture something that someone else, like the way that it was originally done or whatever. I think that everyone has things. I've seen Evita's that I like better than Patty's, and there's all kinds of different examples of that. But I feel like there's so much to that part that gets kind of missed.
Not that this song has anything to do with Mrs. Lovett, but I remember reading an interview with Angela Lansbury years ago, and Mrs. Lovett and Sweeney Todd came up, which she said, like, at least for her, the secret to the role was that, and it's a really hard line to walk, you have to be funny without the character knowing that they're funny. And that is a hard thing to do, because I think sometimes Mrs. Lovett, if you are like intentionally trying to like do pratfalls or like overplay it too much, it can come mawkish at that time. Yeah. But you also still have to be like, oh no, she's actually also evil. Like that reveal has to be like, oh yeah, no, I can see that now.
Yeah. Well, and that's kind of the thing. And that's why, as an actor and a performer, I can, verify this. Comedy is so much harder than drama. Because the characters in a comedy, it's funny because they believe every single thing that they're saying and doing. They're taking themselves 100% seriously, and that's why it's funny. Even the in a Three Stooges sense, it's when it's a farce, it's still like it's self-aware. It's a little more self-conscious in those cases, but it still is. This is what we're saying, and like that in and of itself is ridiculous. But if you're playing it up for laughs, like you're immediately going to lose. Maybe not all of your audience, but the more discerning people who like understand why they're there. The pivot, like I love that moment where, and you see this in books and movies occasionally, where it does come as a surprise. Like she's demented the whole time because she's unironically baking humans into pies. Right,
exactly. Yeah.
So like that's not like that's pathological already.
But knowing that someone's family is still alive and not letting them know is something different.
So they're like adding that layer, and she just did it so well. And I'm sure a lot of it's down to the direction and all of that too. But it's
absolutely, all those collaborators need a hand in it. Talking about surprises, this is also something that's going to come up throughout this season. If the Tim Burton version was your first introduction, then was the Beggar Woman being Sweeney Todd's wife a surprise for you, or did you figure it out pretty early on?
In the movie, yeah, that surprise was kind of ruined because like they didn't do a very good job of like disguising her, and it's harder to do that in a film. But I love, and I've shown the Lansbury Hearn recording to people who have have no idea what, like, they've never even seen the Tim Burton one. They have no idea, no context for it at all. And I love. It's like one of my joys in life is like watching people who like are unsuspecting get hit with that.
Honestly, it's like theater kids' version of showing kids Star Wars for the first time. Mm-hmm. It's like they don't know that Vader is Luke's father. Sorry, spoiler alert. I should label that.
I'll make sure my son doesn't hear this before he's old enough to watch Star Wars.
That's right. And that's something that I really appreciate, the way that I experienced it the first time, because it was a surprise to me of her being. Again, I came at it from just listening to the original Broadway cast recording. Mm-hmm. So, of course, I don't even have the benefit of like seeing something on stage. I'm just like imagining this story happening in my mind. So, in that reveal happens, like, no way. Like, it was like so shocking to me. I remember when I first listened to it.
Can I ask you a sidebar question that is tangentially related? When you listen to a cast recording for the first time, do you read a plot summary first or kind of alongside listening to it? Or do you just go in cold and hope that you can figure it out?
So I am in this weird age bracket where when I was growing up, I was like I was pre-internet by just a couple of years. Plus, I grew up on a farm, so when we did get internet, it was awful to go onto. So it took me even longer to really become an online person.
You mean dial-up speeds are not conducive to quick browsing? For
all the kids out there, yes, you used to have to use the phone line to go onto the internet.
The internet plugged into your phone. They don't know what a phone line is.
Yeah, someone would pick up the phone and kick you off the internet, and it sucked. I guess I just got so into the habit of not reading the plot synopsis until after I'd listened to the score first. Okay. So that's how I normally listen to them. I usually like to try and listen to the thing start to finish in one go. Mm-hmm. And then I do this little game with myself where I'm like, so what is the story? I'm going to make up what I think the story is just by listening to the songs and see how close I am.
Yeah.
And in some cases, I can get fairly close. And then in some cases, I'll just admit it, Dear Evan Hansen, completely off base. Totally did not pick up on some of the more subtle plot things that are going on in that show until I ran like, wait, what?
I have so many feelings about Dear Evan Hansen, but this is not a Dear Evan Hansen podcast, so I won't bore you with them. But yeah, no, that's really interesting.
But you do read a plot synopsis just to answer your own question?
So not usually. I grew up with CD liners. So I would read whatever was available there. Always like the lyrics are usually there. And then like sometimes there was a plot, like a very short or like a blurb about it. And then I'd go look up, the actual show or go find a movie of it if that was available or whatever at the time. But now to me, it kind of depends on like how long the album is. Like if I see a original Broadway cast recording and the album is like an hour long, I'm like, okay, there's not going to be enough book scene in here for me to know what's going on. So I might read a summary of it first. But I do love, because I love the experience of seeing it for the first time. And like, if it's a show I know I'm going to see soon, I don't listen to the cast recording until after I've seen the show. So I try not to read a summary, but there have been shows where I like get halfway through the recording and I'm like, I have no idea what the hell's going on and it's distracting, and then I'll stop and go read it. So it just kind of depends, but I do like being able to just listen to it and imagine what's happening if the recording is produced well enough that I can do that without being distracted by my confusion.
I will say, like, there's some big exceptions to this, but by and large, maybe that's why I got into Sondheim so easy as a teenager. I could figure out what was going on just by listening to the recordings, fairly close to what the show is. Honestly, the biggest exception being Company. I was like, I don't really know what is happening in this show.
Well, but then like turns out like there's not a whole lot of like story there, so like you weren't actually missing much.
I wasn't supposed to know.
Characters. Right.
But yeah, that's it's an interesting way to do it. For whatever reason, I just remember the CDs I collected often didn't have much for plot synopsis. Sometimes they'd have like backgrounds of like the people who wrote the music, that sort of thing. But back before Wikipedia was a thing where you could just do a quick read through of the plot synopsis, it was a little bit harder to figure that out.
Well, I have this theory that like for those of us who did kind of grow up just going in cold and listening and like that was how we figured out what was going on, that like we do have an easier time with like context clues and that kind of thing. Because like, if that's what you trained yourself to do as a kid, listening to cast albums and, using the context you had to discern and build the story in your head, then like it's easier for us now as adults to do that with like kind of discerning for ourselves if this is a trustworthy news source that I'm reading, or reading between the lines of what the people around us are saying, those kinds of things. So it's one of those reasons that I think theater should be for everyone, and everyone should study it.
This is like another sidebar to a sidebar. So as we're recording this, they just announced that, I've just forgot what the production is called. It's on Broadway. Anyway, it's entering its last final weeks, but they're going to actually stream it live to people who want to stream it online for a fee. It's
not Diana, is it?
No, it just announced it's closing today as we're recording this. But it's another one. It's just a regular play. Dang it, I can't remember what it's called. But I actually kind of hope it sets a precedent, because I would love it if shows that are closing anyways are just like, here you go, like we're going to broadcast this live for the next 2 weeks because we're closing anyways, and you might as well, because you're not going to get here in time to watch us anyways. For a reduced ticket price or whatever, that I think. Well, and Lin-Manuel Miranda was saying, I think on Twitter and in an interview or something, that like streaming theater is not going to keep people from going to live theater. No, it's just simply is not, because it's a different experience, and for the junkies like us, there's no replacing being there in person. Exactly. It's like, if that were true, they would eat into too much. Like, no sports game would ever have anyone go into the crowd. So. Right. But here we are amid a global pandemic, and there are stadiums full of people when they could easily be watching at home. But yeah, no, I really hope that does kind of catch on, and that like the licensing houses keep allowing streaming options, and that people keep, because, not only for health and safety, community health reasons, but for accessibility reasons. I personally know a lot of people who don't get to the theater as much as they would like to, because maybe they're in a wheelchair or they're hard of hearing, and the accommodations are not always there. Yeah, I like the accessibility part of it. I also love the fact of, this is a well-known problem anyways about, the cost of going to see a Broadway show is not inexpensive anymore. So if you want people, especially like shows that I think would benefit from like younger audiences going to it, you might not be able to take your family that you have to pay $75 per ticket to go there. So $75 is like a rush ticket for some of these shows too. Like, I don't know, like what Broadway show are you seeing for $75? Wow. Yeah. I'm not going to tell you, like I have bought my tickets to see Company in April. Oh God, I can't imagine. Yeah. And it's like, I'm not even anywhere close to the stage. Oh, no. But no. I'm still paying like 150 American dollars to sit in that seat. So, it's the best thing. Like, I loved going to college in New York. It's a great place to come of age. I highly recommend it. Kids out there, if you're listening, your Auntie Adrianna tells you run away to New York when you're 17. It's a great experience. One of the best things about living there was student rush tickets. Going to see a Broadway show for $35, and they just kind of plug you in wherever they have seats empty. So like I'd end up front row center seeing, Elaine Stritch and Bernadette Peters and A Little Night Music 3 times. Or, that was exactly the kind of, tool that I wish theaters outside of New York did, and a lot do. But I wish it was more of a common practice to kind of do that, because it's like you're not selling the seats anyway. Like the rush is only typically available if you have extra seats. So like, why not, make it available? Fingers are crossed. I guess the other thing we can probably agree on is that there's no place like London. No, right? It's wonderful. I love London, but Sweeney doesn't. Sweeney does not. Poor guy. He is not a fan of London as it is in the year 1850, according to when this play is set. Mm-hmm. I guess just overview before we jump into the lyrics here. What do you think about this song? That's a very general question, but what do you think about this song and its placement? I kind of like this. It feels like a setup, because it's right at the beginning. Like we have the huge ballad where there's like the whole company's on stage, and they're like, and like I can only imagine. And again, I wish I had this experience with this particular show, but being in the audience and you have that wall of sound of like 40 people just screaming at you about Sweeney Todd, and then there's the steam whistle, and it's the whole thing, and then the stage is empty. Little baby Victor Garber comes out, and he's like, "London's beautiful, and it's so serene, and it's like nice and chill and calm." And then like there's the beggar woman, and he's like, "Okay, you silly beggar woman," and then like, and then it just
fucking pivots.
well, the weird thing about this song, I should say right up front, Victor Garber could lead me anywhere he wants to. But second of all, this feels like it's such a nothing song, and yet its echoes are felt through the entire rest of the show.
Oh, yeah.
This is why this show, I think, is so beautiful to me. Is that even this song is like, yeah, whatever, the No Place Like London song at the beginning, but it's like that melody comes back, this person sings this again, this is echoed here at the end. There's a bunch of symmetry that happens with this song.
We're introduced to a very pivotal character.
Yeah, and it feels like, okay, this weird beggar woman who's here for comedy relief. It's like, well, she becomes very important later on. So, and
I love the kind of upending of that Dickensian trope, right? Of like, here's this random beggar woman, and like that's where that ends in Dickens, and so we think that's what's happening here, and then surprise, that's not the case. And so I just love everything about this, and it's not a throwaway at all. And anyone who thinks that it is doesn't understand how Sondheim operates.
Well, the other thing too, I've been really thinking about this as I've been listening to this over the last week. Yes, we've had the ballad sung, so we've had basically the whole company on stage. But if we're thinking, okay, this is now the show proper. We've heard the declaration to the audience about what to expect from this show. Now we're getting into the actual plot mechanics. And it's Anthony. Anthony is the first character that we hear from, which I find kind of interesting that this is the person we first hear in the show, mostly because we do not see Anthony past this scene for quite a while.
Right.
Like he's in this scene and then disappears for like 25 minutes before we get back to him.
Yeah, I think that's really interesting. And I think it has something to, and obviously, you know, the Sondheim's lyrics and then the book are obviously different things. But in terms of, you know, the mechanics of the show, I really like it opening with him as, you know, it's hopeful. And he's very idealistic. And you see that throughout the whole show. Anytime you see him, like the music's lighter, he's, you know, got this kind of dreamier attitude. And Sondheim talks about that in the way that you write lyrics for different characters based on, you know, the substance of their character. It's yet another layer of content dictates form, right? I do think it's really beautiful that it opens with him. It doesn't end with him, but it ends with him and Joanna. I mean, it doesn't like end, but like at the end, you know what I mean? At the end of the story, they're together, but in this kind of like, what the fuck just happened moment.
Yeah, I have to imagine like the next couple of weeks after this show ends, Anthony and Joanna are probably not in like the best place mentally.
No. And I'd watch the sequel of like, do they stay together? I don't know if I would.
No one is going to have a traumatic free life out of this.
Yeah.
Hey everyone, I just have to break into the show here once again to tell you about some of the people and organizations that help this show continue to go. Of course, if you'd like to help support the show for absolutely free, you can give a rating and review on whatever app you listen to podcasts in. That's greatly appreciated. And if you'd like to help monetarily, which will only help to grow and make the show better, you can do so over at our Patreon page. Please do not donate if it impacts you negatively financially. I also need to give a huge thank you to the God That's Good tier from Patreon, the suave sextet of Jack, Todd, Carrie, Witty, Louise, and Christopher. Putting Together is a proud member of the Alberta Podcast Network, locally grown, community supported. The Alberta Podcast Network promotes and supports Alberta-made podcasts and connects their audiences with Alberta-based businesses and organizations. This week we're brought to you by Pod Power. With Pod Power, our sponsors are making it possible for us to amplify the voices of Albertans and Alberta podcasters. This episode, Edmonton Community Foundation is helping us give a Pod Power shout out to Is This For Real? Is This For Real is a podcast about various facets of Black life in Edmonton. In the first season of the show, Breaking the Blue Wall, host Omar Salafu explores anti-Black racism and policing and tells stories about policing in schools, accountability in Alberta's policing system, and the impacts of police violence on Black Edmontonians. You can listen to the podcast and read more about each episode at isthisforreal.ca. You can also support the work of these podcasters and future seasons on Patreon. This week we're also brought to you by ATB, specifically ATB Cares. Looking for a way to give back? ATB Cares makes it easy for all Albertans to support the causes they care about. Donate to your favorite charity through ATB Cares, and ATB will match 20% of every dollar donated to eligible Albertan charities. To learn more and donate, visit atbcares.com. Let's get into the lyrics here then, just to talk about them. So I'm going to go through all of Anthony's lyrics basically here at the very beginning, because we open up, we're sailing into port here on the ship, and Anthony is singing, I have sailed the world, beheld its wonders, from the Dardanelles to the mountains of Peru, but there's no place like London. I feel home again. I could hear the city bells ring whatever I would do. No, there's no place. And then Sweeney Todd interrupts him by saying, no, there's no place like London. When Anthony is like, Mr. Todd, sir? And then Sweeney Todd continues, you are young. Life has been kind to you. You will learn.
I have sailed the world, beheld its wonders, from the Dardanelles to the mountains of Peru. But there's no place like London. I feel home again. I could hear the city bells ring whatever I would do. No, there's no place like London. Mr. Todd, sir. You are young. Life has been kind to you. You will learn.
Yeah, I mean, that's just one. I find it a little hard to believe that Anthony's been truly everywhere, because like we know he picked Sweeney up in Australia, the Dardanelles are in Turkey, Peru is on the other side. Like that's a lot of sailing for like a young man, right?
A young man, yeah.
Like I would buy him like you got to cap him out at like 25, right? So like So like if he left London when he's 18 and has done nothing but sail since then, sure. Maybe that is what we believe, because he does seem like he's been away for a while when he gets here, and I don't have the libretto for this one, but I don't think it says how long. We know how long Sweeney's been away, but I don't think we know how long Anthony's been away from London.
No, I don't think that's ever been revealed, but he's still a young man. Maybe this is why he becomes so infatuated with Joanna, because he hasn't seen an actual woman for 7 years. The other interesting thing that I just want to do kind of as a callback to an episode in our Pacific Overture season, where there is the song Pretty Lady, where there's a bunch of sailors who are singing that song. Not that there's anything similar melody or anything like that, but there is that kind of a similar mentality here. It's like, hey, I'm finally home and I get to go and I get to do all my stuff that I want to do. But he seems to be also the only sailor. It's him and Sweeney Todd. Like, there's no one else that's ever really shown to be on this ship. Not even the movie is there really shown to be anyone else.
Right, because they're getting off the boat. Well, and I think it's interesting too, like this kind of, I can hear the city bells ring wherever whatever I would do. Like that speaks, I think, to anyone who has a strong connection to a place that they no longer are. You know, like when I lived in New York, you know, it's that feeling of like when you fly back into LaGuardia and you can see the city in the distance, and that there's like a special energy that happens. Right. And I think it's, you know, it's pretty universal. Like whatever home is to you, like you can hear, smell, taste, feel it no matter where you are in the world. And there's nothing like going like that moment when you come back there.
It's so true. Like, again, I've never lived in New York City, but whenever I visit, you know, you walk out of the airport, I'm like, oh, it smells like New York.
Yeah.
I'm back.
Or even like here in Southwest Ohio, where I live in Cincinnati, there's a particular passage of the interstate coming up from Kentucky right before you cross the Ohio River into Ohio. It's called the Cut in the Hill. You go through that passage and there's a curve, and then boom, there's the Cincinnati skyline. And like, it's not the New York skyline, but you know, like I, you know, grew up coming through there on our way back from visiting family and whatever. And like, that's when I get that feeling about my hometown. And so I think that like, it doesn't have to be New York or London or Paris or Rome or whatever. No. It doesn't have to be glamorous. It can just be little old Cincinnati or wherever, but like whatever that means to you. And, like I think everyone who identifies strongly with their hometown or somewhere else that they have a connection to, I think you can find that for yourself too.
Well, I also want to pull out that word home specifically. Anthony says, I am home again. And it's only a few songs later, My Friends, where Sweeney is like, when he has his razors, like home, right? He actually holds on that idea. Mm-hmm. So Sweeney doesn't really feel like he's home until he actually has the razor back in his hand, whereas Anthony is like, I'm home again, just by seeing the skyline. And this is very two different aspects of these characters.
I'm a musician insofar as like I'm a singer and I can read music, but I'm not like a music theory expert. But the way that the notes and the lyrics work together on that line, I feel home again. It's I feel home again. It feels like a sigh when you say it. Like it's just like you can like drop into it. And it feels like a sigh of relief. And I really like that. And I think it's really special.
No, that's great. The other thing that I always find interesting about this song is actually how Sweeney ends this. Like, you are young, life has been kind to you, you will learn. It almost feels like obviously he's not saying everything that he means. We find out later, like his backstory and kind of what he's meaning behind these kind of cryptic words. But at the same time, like he often calls himself, right? Like he was young and naive. He even calls the same thing to his like wife, I believe. And here it's like, life has been kind to you, you will learn. It's almost like he should be saying you're naive, but he doesn't say that.
Yeah, well, and I think it's a kinder way to say that, right? You don't just tell someone you're so naive. That's not a kind thing to say to someone. But I also, which is interesting, I think, in and of itself, because Sweeney Todd or Benjamin Barker is not someone we like associate kindness with. But I also think that it also kind of has, to me, it feels like maybe this is not the first time they've had, like, right, the boat trip from Australia to London is not a short one. Right. And like, especially if Anthony's been away this long and he feels this strongly about this place, this is probably not the first time that he's just like sat there rhapsodizing about it. And like, we get the sense that when we do move on to Barber and his wife, that like, this is probably the first time that Sweeney has revealed anything personal about himself to Anthony. But like maybe they've had discussions where he's like tried to tell him like, no, the city's actually kind of shitty and this and that. And Anthony's like, no, it's great. Like everything's fantastic. And so like, to me, it kind of has the ring of like, he's going to pick his battles, right? He knows that there's no way for him to convince Anthony that this is not actually the case, that the city is not this beautiful, wonderful place. Or that it's not to him anyway. I
have to imagine this sail back to London. Must have been like some like very uncomfortable moments where it's like, oh, I can't wait to get back to London. It's like, sucks. Yeah. Such a drive. Leaves you a husk of a man. Like, all right, Sweeney, lighten up.
Well, it must have felt absolutely interminable to him too, right? Because like when all you want, like when you have a singular focus, and especially if that singular focus is like revenge, it's because like, even at this point he doesn't know, right? He doesn't know.
It's true. He does not know. He has a suspicion of what has happened, right, but he does not actually know until Mrs. Lovett tells him.
And I think like for him, best case scenario is his wife married Judge Turpin and they raised the daughter together and everyone's happy. Like that's like, I guess that's a best case scenario in his mind. Right. So like he has no idea. So maybe he isn't out for revenge yet necessarily, but he's just like, he knows that he's not going to go back to like his wife and child just like sitting there waiting for him. Yeah,
that's an interesting prospect to bring up. And I mean, this is for potentially like the actors who are going to take on these roles and how you want to infuse that. But at this point, you have to imagine like he's super pessimistic. He's expecting the worst, but we don't actually really know what the worst is that he's imagining. I guess best case scenario, like you said, like, she's remarried. He's going to come into the middle of that. maybe both her and Joanna are dead. Like, he really does not know what he's coming back into.
I guess maybe best case, Judge Turpin is dead.
Right, yeah. But he's had like all these scenarios running through his head, so he doesn't really know what he's going to be walking into the middle of. For what, like
15 years, 20 years, something like that?
15,
he's been away?
I think is what they say. Yeah. On the good ship Bountiful, as he says. Yeah.
Which I think is a great name for the ship and very apropos for like how the story unfolds.
Now, depending on the recording you're listening to, you'll hear a bit of a book scene usually at this point in the recording. But then the crazy beggar woman shows up into the scene. I should say this too. This song, No Place Like London, and the next song that follows it, The Barber and His Wife, there is no consensus on the recordings how it's supposed to be split up. So I'm just going by the book, Finishing the Hat, on where the split actually happens, because every recording is different and how they decide to split these songs up. Anyways, the beggar woman does come and goes, alms, alms for a miserable woman on a miserable chilly morning. And then Anthony gives her some coins and she says, thank you, sir. Thank you. How'd you like a little muff, dear? A little jig, a little bounce around the bush. Wouldn't you like to push me parsley? It looks to me, dear, like you got plenty there to push.
Would you like a little swift, yeah? A little jig, a little bounce around the bush? Wouldn't you like to push me crumpet? It looks to me, dear, like you got plenty there to push.
Okay, so we have a lot to unpack here.
my like first reaction here is I do want to, for at least for the purposes of our discussion, if we could refrain from calling her crazy, because she's really a victim. And
absolutely. Like,
we don't know that yet at this point in the story. And obviously like Anthony and Sweeney Todd don't know that encountering her. And to her, she does just look like a crazy lady.
Yeah. The victimhood is definitely massive for her character.
Lucy is her name, right?
Lucy. Yeah.
We never get to meet her as Lucy. Like in the times that we see her in the flashbacks, she doesn't speak.
That's right. And give a bit of foreshadowing, because again, I've already recorded the episode that comes out after this. But what I actually also find kind of interesting is that even when Sweeney sings about her, we still don't really learn anything about her.
No. Yeah, we don't know
except that she was beautiful.
Her.
Like, that's really all he says about her.
Yeah. Nobody in the world of this show is kind to her, so I think we should be.
For sure. What it also calls out to me, like just with her language and what she's, very unsubtle, like asking for sex for trade.
Sure.
This is still such a vivid memory of my parents checking explicit advisory labels on certain albums that I would buy as a teenager, but they did not care what I bought when it was a theater album. Like for whatever reason, they did not check that. So it's like at 13 and 14, I'm listening to this and Les Mis, and it's like I have very aggressively sexual songs
but no
and people
Tupac
swearing.
Or Biggie.
Yeah, but no Tupac. That's a bit too much. So I always remember that as like, ooh, this feels like naughty that I'm listening to this almost.
Because it was.
Yeah.
Naughty, Kyle. But no, and this line looks to me, dear, like you got plenty there to push. Like that was the first time I remember specifically like picking out a dick joke in musical theater. Right?
Yeah.
And not the first time I was scandalized. I remember that very clearly too. But the first time that I was like, oh, this is not cool. Great. That's here too. Awesome. It's not just for South Park.
When was the first time you were scandalized?
In also a Sondheim moment in the cast recording of Putting It Together. That was the Julie Andrews version. When Julie Andrews says, fuck it, let's do it. 13-year-old me was not prepared for that. I couldn't handle it.
Mary Poppins, what are you saying? That was
the context. The Queen Clarice Rinaldi, as I live and breathe.
Yeah.
That language, my goodness. But no, but I think that was also, I don't know, I love the language that she uses here.
Sondheim goes into very great depth about the word choices that he uses for Lucy. Just for the section that we're talking about here, we need to understand that this is both a combination of actual Cockney rhyming slang and stuff that is completely from his mind's eye. Like he has made this up completely. So the stuff that is authentic is the word muff, which is like people in America know that. People in the UK know that.
Mhm.
Jig jig is not Cockney, but in England there's a phrase like jig a jig, apparently, but we can kind of by context clues understand what she means. Like that's not hard to understand. And then bounce around the bush, pure invention, although he puts in here like bush immediately recognizable in the United States, what that means. The one that I actually think is interesting is push me parsley is authentic. Oh, sorry, the parsley is authentic for what she's referring to. Push is not. He kind of made that so that the rhyme actually works properly. You will know, like me though, that if you listen to the original Broadway cast recording, she doesn't say push me parsley. She says push me crumpet, because that is what's recorded on that original Broadway cast recording.
I love the background on that. He heard the phrase in a movie.
Yeah, a bit of crumpet in some movies.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And like thought it was sexual, but it's not.
But it's not. It's totally not. He just assumed that it was.
Can I just say, as not a full side, just like a tiny sidebar, that I love, this is like possibly like one of the, top 3 geniuses of our time of, in any field on this planet. And he didn't look it up. And like he famously has said, and he says in this chapter that he hates research. And I get that, but like pay someone to research it for you.
This seems like an easy thing to like just quickly look up or something
and like
that.
Certainly less easy in the 70s, right? And or 70s and 80s than it is now, for sure. But like, and he talks about the struggle of like juggling dictionaries and thesauruses and all of that. But like, look it up. If you're not sure. Sorry, that's all. I just
No, it's so true. But I think what it also calls, this is something I think we were talking about before we push record. I love hearing people who just make up words and it kind of sounds like it's just a regular word and you just don't question it. People always talk about Shakespeare making up words all the time that we use even still to this day. I believe the example I was saying, I think it's Dr. Seuss who made up the word nerd, or someone did. So it's like these words that enter our lexicon are just made up. And Sondheim had already made a phrase, everything's coming up roses, but something that was not a thing before he wrote that into the musical
I'll
Gypsy.
drink to that.
And so it's so fascinating to see him just like kind of work through this and be like, what's close and what can I make my own thing and do this. The big one is that I can't remember. Is that in the original?
It's in the original Broadway cast.
Push Me Squiff? Does that show up? Yeah,
it's in the original
right?
recording, but I don't think it shows up anywhere else.
Yeah, I think that's true. Like that is his complete invention.
Yeah.
But then
I would have bought it.
I would have bought it too. And someone called him out on it. It's like that's not a thing. Just take that out. It sounds too weird.
Honestly, Kyle, you could do an entire episode on words and phrases that Sondheim invented. You could do an entire episode for each one, honestly, and just like track it through
Welcome
pop culture.
to the episode on Split Me Squiff. We're going to talk about this for 45 minutes.
Challenge accepted.
Yeah, exactly. The thing I also need to call out here is that, we're having fun here, of course, about her coming in and spouting this. At the same time, the tunes are like alms, alms for a miserable woman. And we'll get here to like, don't I know you, mister? It's so interesting that we're bringing this again very early in the show. And those are the last lines that she says in this entire show when we get to like the final act. So again, I like that bit of symmetry that starts to happen even this early on.
Oh, yeah.
There is, of course, this gets licensed to middle schools and high schools to perform. And of course, you cannot have a 13-year-old girl come out on stage and start singing this.
Wouldn't you like a little muff deer?
Yeah, like you could. And I don't know. I probably wouldn't care, but I would understand some parents being like, no, I'm not. Sure. I don't want this.
Finding that objectionable.
So Sondheim has written alternate lyrics. So if you have never read this, I find this hilarious. So instead of that whole bit there, he changes it to so that they can perform it. How'd you like a little kiss, dear? I'll be your girlfriend. You won't do better on the docks. Wouldn't you like to take me dancing and be my boyfriend and buy me lots of pretty frocks?
I love Sondheim has said repeatedly in writing, and this is one of the beautiful things that has happened since he passed away, is the Sondheim Letters account on Instagram.
Yeah,
people are just like flooding the internet with correspondence that they had with him, which I think it just is one beautiful like historical record in, like just the week and a half or whatever since he passed away because like we have more written correspondence from him just in the last couple of weeks than we have for like Rodgers and Hammerstein. Like it's amazing.
I do kind of hope someone does make like a coffee table book or something out of all those ones, which would be kind of beautiful.
Sure. I'm sure Ashley Pepper's all over it already, but the one that stands out to me was there was a high school production somewhere that was doing Sweeney Todd, and like at the last minute, they tried, the PTA or like someone, the school board tried to shut it down. They campaigned, and they finally got it approved, and they were able to put it up. And I think it was opening night or closing night. The director read a letter to the company of the show that was basically, and he didn't say who it was from, and it was, thank you for doing this work. I think it's so important. I've never understood what's so objectionable about it, because this is what it's actually about. It's not just the blood and guts and sex and whatever. So thank you for doing the show. You guys are awesome. Love, Stephen Sondheim. And all the little children lost their minds, and it was adorable. I imagine, I don't know, I wasn't there, but the letter is on, at Sondheim Letters on Instagram, and everyone should go read it, because just fall down the rabbit hole and read everything up there, because it's so fascinating seeing these little glimpses of moments in time and conversations that he had.
It reminds me that he would actually have been probably great at Twitter had he been 40 years younger.
Yeah. Well, he had an official Instagram that had like 2 pictures on it.
Yeah, I know.
But I think these lines are a joke. And I think like he wrote them as a joke. I mean, he didn't write them as a joke. He wrote them very seriously so that people would do this work, because the work needs to be done. Like he's been on the record about how it's dumb to like make junior editions of shows, and I think there are like junior editions of Into the Woods and whatever, but but the whole other conversation.
The only one I'm like super against, like the junior editions or like alternate slightly is whatever. But I do know that there are some schools out there that only do like the first act of Into the Woods, and I was like, that's
the junior edition.
Yeah, I know. It's like, what a complete missing of the point of that show to only do the first half.
And like, you could do a whole episode about the merits of junior editions, but school editions. But if you can't do the show, do a different show. Don't
do the show,
right? Yeah. And I think that's fine. But the way that he writes these lines, like they're bad. And I think they're bad on purpose.
Yeah, it's like, fine. If you want me to do this, just do it this way.
I don't think he's ever accidentally written something bad. And on the times when he's like said publicly later, like, yeah, this is bad, but I either didn't care enough to fix it or was overruled or by other collaborators or whatever. And so like this concession here of like, okay, fine, here, whatever. I hate that he had to do it. But I love the way he did it. It's like, fine, I'll give you what you want, but it's not going to be good.
Have you ever, this is maybe a very deep pull. Have you ever seen that video online of Tom Hanks at a Microsoft keynote presentation? And if you people don't know what I'm talking about, he did one of the Angels and Demons movies. I can't remember if it was like the first one or second one. Anyways, his agent did not do a fine read of the contract he signed, and one of the little things inside the contract was that he had to come and be like this MC or give this presentation at a Microsoft thing. If you want to see a masterclass of passive aggression, go and watch him give that speech, because he hates being on stage. And he's like Mr. Dad America. And he's just like, no, I'm here contractually obligated. And it's like,
that's
and he
hilarious.
lets everyone know that he does not want to be there, but he's doing it. And this kind of feels like the same thing. It's like, all right, you can do it, but I'm not going to be happy doing it for you.
Let me say that the first Sony product I ever saw was a massive, actually, quote unquote, portable reel-to-reel tape recorder the size of a singer's sewing machine. Oh gosh, did I want one of those, but I couldn't afford the $120. No, so what I did was instead saved up and eventually bought my girlfriend's old Sony Trinitron. And there began my adventures with Sony. It was nothing but Sony there. I began to store a shelving system. Old Sony products began to hold new Sony products. Up and up and up it went. So now I have such a stack of old televisions, recording devices, games, clock radios, that my Bluetooth video player sits 8 feet above my kitchen sofa. I have to point up like this and wait for the 40 seconds for the damn thing to boot up. Now, on with the scripted portion of our program, and I guarantee you, I have not memorized these words. I was 7 years old.
Like, I am technically fulfilling this obligation, but I'm going to let everyone know that, like, I am very much phoning it in. I'm writing that down because I have mom brain now, so I can't remember anything.
That's right. As another side note, the other weird junior version is that apparently they only do the second half of Sunday in the Park with George. That's the really weird part. I'm just joking. I have no idea if that's true, but because I'm a Shakespearean scholar. I hate when people like paraphrase for anything that you're in. Don't paraphrase. It's here. It's on the script. Read what's on the page. You're not the playwright. Read what's there. And so like or when people say like, well, and I've been in shows where this happens, where a director will deviate from a line or a blocking note or something that's in the script because they're like, well, I think it's out of character for this person to do that. And I'm like, but it's not. It's literally in character. It's on the page. It's what the character does. So you need to adjust your expectations of this character to accommodate for the things they actually do and say per the text. And so I think it's really interesting the way people frame their expectations of fictional characters. I don't like all the murder at the end of Hamlet, so I'm going to cut that all out.
Right. Like, well, and you know, and you can there are Shakespeare podcasts that talk about the merits of chopping up Shakespeare, and I think that there are benefits to doing that in certain cases because no matter how good of a dramaturg or director or actors you have, some stuff just doesn't translate to a modern audience that was 500 years ago. So like, I get that, but like, this is copyright protected. Like this is now, you were
paying the estates of these people to put this on.
Oh no, don't talk about Sondheim's estate. I'm not ready for that yet.
I know. Well, here's how the song ends.
Yeah. Woo, digress.
Lucy continues on and goes, alms, alms for a pitiful woman who's got wandering wits. Hey, don't I know you, mister? And then Sweeney goes like, must you glare at me, woman? Off with you, off with you. And then she continues, then how would you like to split me muff, mister? We'll go jig, jig a little. And he like throws her off and she in the distance goes, alms, alms for a desperate woman.
Must you glare at me, woman? Off with you. Off, I say.
Then how would you like to split me muff, mister? We'll go jig, jig a little.
Off, I said, to the devil with you.
Alms for a pitiful woman.
Pardon me, sir, but...
So she said miserable, she said desperate. I think just like blossoming from this conversation that we've been having, I think it is fascinating and it is obviously like one of my privileges, I guess, is that like, I know that the first time that I engaged with this, like she does almost seem like a comic relief for someone to be like, oh, let's just laugh at this weird person who's come on here. But she, like, even in her lyrics, she's like telling you like, no, like there is something deeply...
I am desperate. I am miserable.
I'm miserable. Like there's some deep pain here with this character that I don't think we all discover until much too late. And I mean, if you want to get like super political, isn't that kind of true on how we treat homeless people now? Like, you know what I mean?
Ding, ding, ding. Well, and I think that I think that it absolutely touches on something, Kyle, because it's her entrance and exit are like kind of bookended with the slower kind of, it's got like a funereal march tone of alms, alms for a desperate one, that sort of sweeping sound. And then there's the gear shift. And it is like at first, I think it's one of those, that song in Cabaret with the gorilla suit where you're watching that. And you're like, oh, it's so funny. It's a dancing gorilla. She wouldn't look Jewish at all. And you're like, oh, shit.
Whoa.
What? Right. And it's one of those moments because she's like singing this like soaring alms, alms, and then da 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 da, you know. And so like, I think you're meant to be caught off guard by that and kind of laugh uncomfortably. And then you like understand like, oh, she's actually not well. And this is not okay. And this is very sad that some set of circumstances in her life have led her to where she's not well and she's soliciting men on the docks. And so I think that's very intentional.
Absolutely. If You Could See Her, by the way, is the song from Cabaret.
Thank you. But I think it is like that. And I think it's like that on purpose. I also, as a person with ADHD, the line, "Who's got wandering wits? Hey, don't I know you?" I identify really strongly with that. Just like, oh, hey.
Yeah, let's go in a completely 90-degree direction.
Now for something completely different.
And then this goes really straight into like the barber and his wife, right? Like these really are two songs that are mashed together. They're two halves of the same whole, but everyone will have to wait till next week for me to jump into the barber and his wife and start to unpack that here a little bit. Adrianna, thank you so much for joining me here today, first of all. This was really great. But I guess before we go into like our official wrap up here, overall, like this song, would you rate this top 5, middle 5? Like how would you put this?
It's really hard to, I don't have, for most shows, especially Sondheim ones, I don't tend to have like overall top favorite songs. I think for me, I have categories of like, this one is like, here are my top 3 like audition songs that I would pull from the show. And here are my top 3 that I think are really great for this character or really great for kind of like the plot exposition. And so I think like in the pantheon of musical theater, I think No Place Like London going into Barber and His Wife, I think is definitely in my top 5 of expositional numbers, because the way that they set the tone and the pace for the rest of the show and give us a lot of our recurring musical themes and lyrical themes. And right off the bat, we have 3 very different characters who have very different speech mannerisms and musical expression mannerisms, and like just the way that they're characterized musically. I think it like of the songs that are out there, it's one of the better ones for that.
What I kind of was confronted by, like watching the stage version, even watching the movie, the Tim Burton movie, what's so economical with how this is plotted out. And again, like huge congratulations to like Hugh Wheeler for writing the book, for Sondheim writing the music and lyrics, and probably Hal Prince to help like actually stage this. But within that 15 minutes, we're introduced to the show. We are told like, hey, this is like a work of fiction, right? Here's Sweeney. We're not going to spoil the ending for you. Into the actual narrative. We're introduced to Anthony, who's like young and optimistic. We're introduced to Sweeney, who is old and pessimistic. We have introduced to this woman who we think might be just comedic relief, but is actually harboring a deep, deep secret, which will get paid off later on. Into the Barber and His Wife, where we get his backstory a little bit and why he's coming back to London in the first place. And then straight into Worst Pies of London, where we meet Mrs. Lovett. And it's like, that all happens in 15 minutes. And like, that's so much stuff. And yet it feels like you're in this world of like a bunch of different characters, and you can picture it in your mind if you're just listening to the audio, or if you're in the audience. It's like, we're going through this, and and what this allows us to do, though, that I've really figured out, and why I think this is expertly plotted, you are going at such a fast pace here that we can slow down when we get to like Pirellis and stuff like that, because it allows us to like really sink it in before we ramp it back up again. In the second act.
It's like the first 10 minutes of Up.
Right. Yeah. We're just like, we're going. Right?
Yeah. Well, and it tells its own whole story that's very contained. And like, we could have a whole other musical about the deposing of Benjamin Button and the rape of Lucy and the sending him off to Australia. Like, that could be its own story, and his struggle to get back here, right? And we just pick them up at the sequel, you know. That's right. So like the way that they condense that into such a short span of time and take us on that emotional journey. Because when you're, especially because the movie is not as impactful for me in this sense, because I think that this part in the movie does move a little slower, and actually cut out some lyrics too in the movie. I didn't mention that. You know, watching that, especially if you are a woman or someone who knows a woman, which is everyone, the like sexual assault aspect in the Barber and His Wife, like that, and I don't want to get into that because I know you have another episode for that, but like there's a whole complete emotional journey that happens in a very short span of time. So by the time we come out of that and walk into Worst Pies in London, you've cried already, you've laughed already, you've been shocked and horrified already, and you're like, okay, what's next? I guess I'm just open for anything now.
I can understand why audiences at the time were like, what is this?
Yeah.
Or reviewers a lot too were like pretty like, what is happening in the show?
It can be disorienting for sure.
Yeah. I also want to point out, I didn't want to interrupt you. You did say Benjamin Button instead of Benjamin Barker. And now I'm wanting to see that movie of a serial killer aging backwards.
Benjamin Button's Revenge.
Yeah. Like I said, Adrianna, thank you so much for joining me here today. If people wanted to follow you online, is there a way to do so?
Yeah, I am on Instagram at Mrs. Will Shakes, as in like the bride of William Shakespeare. Sorry, Anne Hathaway. And sorry to my actual husband.
Right.
But yeah, it's mostly pictures of my dogs, and I share a lot of like political things in my story. I don't post a lot, but I will be posting a lot because I have a show coming up, which I'm really excited about. My first show in like 2.5 years at the time that it opens. I'm going to be tap dancing in the ensemble of Something Rotten, which I'm really excited about. Yeah. So
when
that's coming up, and I believe we open mid to late April.
Oh, okay. Yeah. This will be out in enough time.
Yeah. So if you find yourself in the greater Cincinnati area and want to see some amazing tap dancing and rock and roll Shakespeare times musical, check out footlighters.org for more. And I'm sure I'll be posting all about it.
There is a gypsy reference in Something Rotten, right? Am I making that up? Or is there there's a Sondheim reference somewhere?
There's a bunch. I saw a list somewhere that was like all 73 musical references and this one number and Something Rotten. So yeah, I'm sure there are many Sondheim references throughout the show.
For sure.
Next time I talk to you, I'll report back with a complete list.
Good. Report from the field. Last thing, I'm asking every guest here this season then, as a final question, what is your favorite kind of pie?
Oh, boy. So do I have to choose between sweet and like, can I have a favorite sweet and a favorite savory? Favorite sweet, definitely pumpkin pie. Although apple is more versatile. Like I don't want a pumpkin pie in the summer, but like I could eat an apple pie any time of year. And then savory pie, I love like a really good like homemade shepherd's pie. But like with lamb.
Sprinkled with actual shepherd or no?
Yes, actual shepherd on top. Maybe you could do for a Sondheim adjacent, do a waitress episode.
That actually might not be a bad idea next month.
Speaking of Sondheim adjacent, Evita, I don't know if you know this about me, is my favorite show of all time, despite Sondheim being my personal Lord and Savior. But yeah, so I was very happy to hear that episode. I
still have fond memories, honestly, of. This is so embarrassing because I grew up on the farm. We had so much lawn to cut sometimes. So I get on the riding mower and I would just belt Evita as I was like driving on like the lawnmower outside.
Honestly, Kyle, that sounds like the dream. So I know. No one to hear you literally scream.
Could not hit those high notes, I'll say that, but I could do a pretty good Magaldi for a while. Great. Thank you. Thank you so much for listening. You can send emails to puttingittogetherpodcast@gmail.com. You can also follow Sondheim Podcast on Twitter and Instagram. And you can support the show on Patreon by going to patreon.com/puttingittogetherpodcast. Thank you to the Alberta Podcast Network, to Pod Power, and to ATB this week. Putting It Together is available on Apple Podcasts, Google Podcasts, Spotify, and pretty much anywhere you can get podcasts from. Consider subscribing so that you never miss an episode. Next week, we'll be talking about the barber and his wife. Oh, and it was beautiful. As always, a big thank you to the great Chris Taniguchi, who designed the podcast artwork, and Nick Driscoll for composing our theme music. Well, we've reached the end of our episode. Yes, I know. Goodbye for now.